My name is Pascaline Manubi, and I'm an admin assistant here at the School of Programming and Software Development.
Hello, my name is Edmond Kabore, and assistant to Madrid Group.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Chioma Ibe, intern with School of Programming and Software Development.
Good morning, everyone. I am Anagha Joshi from St. Lucia. I am doing internship with Mildred Consultancy Services.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Brotherson from Antigua and Barbuda, ECBS Focal Point. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Shannon Mandesi, Senior Statistical Assistant in St. Vincent.
Okay, I think I'm not sure if we'll go around, but we have an idea of those who are here. I want to thank you for joining again this morning. Today is day 3 of the training series titled Database Structure, Definitions, Source Code, and Configuration Structure. Today's topic is the continuation of the source code walkthrough. Yesterday we looked at source code walkthrough for the patient management and reporting system, and today we are going to walk through the source code for the training and virtual training workshop portal. We have so far looked at the system directory structure, the configurations, the server configuration. We looked at the source code yesterday, and just for the purpose of us to be able to catch up today, we're just going to run through a review of all that we have discussed this far. Again, the system was implemented in 2018 in all islands apart from St. Vincent, that implemented in 2017. There are various levels of usage across the different islands and different number of sites across the islands. Before now, the system was hosted with a virtual private cloud vendor, DigitalOcean, and subscription was maintained by the OECS Commission. Also, the domain name was also by Namecheap, and up until May 31st, the OECS Commission maintains the domain until the countries were required to create a subdomain of the government domain, which is now the domain name that is bound to the IP address of the internal servers, also created by the countries. All of the patient records, the system was migrated by May 31st also into the country's internal resources. Countries created servers and granted VPN and SSH access for me to configure and then clone the system. The system uses a version control system, Git, and we host all of the source code on GitHub, as we have seen. Each island has the repository for their source code. Now, this source code and repository should be handed over by the OECS at the end of this training workshop series by the first week in December or the last week in November this year. The purpose of this workshop is to get the IT staff or any of the supervisors familiar with the source code structure and where things are placed, just so that in the event you want to make changes or there is an error that you can fix, you can also attempt to do that, or you want to add things or create more API routes and things like that. The system was created using PHP. At the time of the first implementation or the first development, the programming language used was Java, and it was requested to be changed to a programming language where the skills might be more available within the islands, and it was decided to change or rewrite the system in PHP. Now, while majority of the system, the modules are in PHP, all of the microservices and the API is in Python. Data analysis is done with JavaScript, and Python is the scripting language, while JavaScript is the language we use for all visualization and also every interaction between the client and the system. We have separated the different modules of the system, or the different functionalities, into modules, and these modules are in the countries/country directory of the system. This directory is the most important directory here that holds very critical files for the system. We looked at the different directories that the system has in the yesterday's walkthrough. We talked about the pages directory that holds all of these modules. We have two systems that are held here, and both of them are modularized system where the functionalities are grouped according to a module. Each module is defined as a role on the system. The patient management and reporting system requires that users are authenticated based on their email address and the password that they set, and also based on the role assigned. Once authenticated to the home page of the role assigned, they are now authorized to perform different functionalities based on the permissions that they have been assigned within the role. The modules that control the patient management and reporting system are the screenings and management module, the monitoring and reporting module, and the administration module. The administration module is the module or the role that is assigned to super users or IT staff, or anybody who will be concerned with configuring the system with dynamic variables, who will create and assign users, who will manage users' accounts and also manage clients' accounts and retrieve things like missing unique IDs and tracking information. A user who is assigned the monitoring and reporting role is like the epidemiologists or the surveillance officers, or also the IT staff who will be concerned with exporting reports like the aggregated and disaggregated reports from the data collected in the system. The user assigned the screenings and management role. So these are the major users where we have all of the VCT providers, the lab, the pharmacists, the clinical care providers for all of the infectious diseases that are being tracked. All of these are under the screenings and management. We looked at the source code structure and how these source code are organized yesterday, and we're going to review that. For each of the code, and I'll switch my screen so that we can look at this. So let's go back and start with the administration. We have said that we have a folder, which is also a very critical folder called includes folder in all of the modules. This folder holds common files like the header information, the navigation, and also the initialization information that authenticates a user when the user tries to log in. When a user provides login information, this init file looks at the person's information, and if the information is not found or not matched, is redirected back to the login page. If the user is successfully logged in and the user has a role assigned, it looks at that role. If the role is equal to the role or the module, then it allows the user access, sets the session, and then allows the user access to the home page of the assigned role. And if that user is not assigned that role, then it now gives an error telling the user that those pages are controlled or are access controlled. Then we have a navigation that controls all of what the user sees based on the functionality of the user, based on the permissions of the user. The functionalities will be displayed in drop-down menus. So the navigation file and the init file are critical files that needs to be included on all the pages that are protected in this module. Then we have the head file that holds metadata information for the document. It also holds some script information that is used also on all documents or on all files within the module. The header file is a file that just includes all of these important documents and it must be in the order of initialization, head and nav. You can't put the nav before the init. The init must come first. And then we have the footer information that just closes all of the tags that were not closed. Footer can also include any of the footers, any kind of footer you want, contact us or manuals or whatever you want to put at the footer of the document. Then we have other folders. The folders are named according to what they hold. The script folder holds scripts, and these scripts are just validation scripts for forms that put the restrictions or the requirements for the values that are to be entered into the different form fields. Then we also have the files that are named closely to what function or what information that file collects. So for instance, we have a file called address change history. This address change history just tells us that we are dealing with a file that deals with address change of a client. And so whenever we want to get the history of different addresses recorded on the system for a particular client, we know that the file that handles this is address change history. We also have things like admin home, which means that this is the file that controls the home page. We have file named all HIV, which means that this is a file that enables us to view all HIV screenings. All STI helps us to view all other STI screenings. All TB, the same thing. So the names of the files within the modules are always similar to the function of that file. There are many files here and several forms and several processing pages. Some of the processing pages are to process an insert operation. So when a form is filled and we want to insert this form into the database table, we see the name of the file to be insert something. So when we say insert birth, so maybe we're filling in birth information and we have the processing page to be insert birth. If we're updating, we'll find the name of the file to be something like update. So we want to update the ethnicity of a client. We'll see update ethnicity as the processing page there. So without actually looking at or knowing what the file does, you can actually go to the file, and let's say I go to this file called assign site, and I want to know what file processes this page. I have the action attributes for the form tag to be insert assign site.php, and so I just know that this value of the action attribute is the file that processes this page. So apart from it named similar to what it does, we can also find the processing page as the value of the action attribute or whatever is specified. When we look at the value of the ID attribute that matches the jQuery or the AJAX script at the top of the page, whatever address is specified or file is specified there. Okay, so we looked at that of the administration, we looked at that of the monitoring and reporting, we looked at that of the screenings and management yesterday. So let's look at that of the virtual training workshop portal that is controlled by, or that has 4 modules: the developer, the guest, the facilitator, and the participant. Let's look at the facilitator module, for instance. The virtual training workshop platform is the platform you log into to be able to view your schedule and join this training workshop. It requires no permissions. It just requires you to be assigned to a role. And then once you're assigned to the role, you can access all of the functionalities of the assigned role. The structure of that system is to have a role called the developer, who is the first person that is going to create a training workshop, who is the person who creates the user's account and manages users' accounts, who creates a who oversees all the activities of both the facilitator and the participants. Then the facilitator is the one who is able to configure a training workshop that has been created by a developer. The facilitator will have access to create training sessions, create session rooms, be able to add participants to training, those participants must already have an account on the system that was created by the developer, and then the facilitator can also upload notes and resources, upload videos, is able to send announcements, create question polls and questions and assessments for the training workshop, add participants to different sessions and different session rooms, and is also able to grade assessments. Then we have the participant role that controls all of the functionalities of all the attendees of the training workshop. This participant role controls what the participant sees, their schedule, all of the resources that has been uploaded by the facilitator, all of the schedule that has been set, all the trainings that they have been assigned to, the different sessions or the session rooms. They can also take assessments, and there are 3 types of assessments. We have the certification assessments, we have the pre-assessments, and we have the summative assessment. And all of these different types of assessments are used at different levels. Pre-assessment before a training workshop, summative assessment maybe after the workshop, and certification is maybe final assessment after a training workshop has been concluded. Then we have the guest role that is exactly like the participants. The only difference with the guest and the participant is that a guest can only join training workshop but doesn't have access to doing things like assessment and the rest, because they're just like external observers. Okay, anybody with questions before I go further?
Continue, Mildred. I think we are following.
Okay. All right. So let's look at the source code for this. This virtual training workshop system does not have as much of the hundreds of files and database table has the patient management and reporting system. It takes the same structure, like having an includes file that holds different critical files that must be included at the head of every document. We have the initialization file, which also does the same thing like the init file we have seen in the other modules, that looks at the user's credentials, displays error messages when anything is wrong with that credential, look at the role assigned to the user whose credential matches, and redirects the person to the home page of the assigned role. We have the nav also, that is also the navigation, what controls the navigation bar. On the navigation is where you find the menu or the drop-down menus of all of the functionalities and the things that the user can do. The things that the user can do in the virtual training workshop portal is the same for everybody assigned that role. There is no permission control. And so once the nav is included, they have access to all the functionalities included in the navigation. Now the developer can create and manage users, can view all the list of all the users that are on the system to see whose account is activated and whose account is not activated. They can delete users' accounts to be able to recreate in the case of errors, or maybe the user was banned out of the system. The developer can also create new trainings, can view all of the facilitators in the system and their activities, and can also view all the participants' schedule. So if the supervisor is assigned the developer role, so that a supervisor can know which of their staff is on which training workshop. So we go to the view participants schedule to see all of the schedule of all the staff, to know what everyone is doing at what time, or where everyone is assigned at what time. The source code that controls these functionalities, we have one, they are named in similar ways the others are named. We have one that is called view participants. We just know that this allows them to be able to view the participant schedule. There's a lot of forms on this. A form that will ask what participants do you want to do from a particular training, gives a drop-down menu of the trainings that have been created or configured, or that has participants attached or assigned to a training workshop. And then when that is submitted, it now goes to the view that has all of this information in one place, and displays all of the information of all the participants for the selected training workshop. The same thing with the facilitator. Once to view facilitator of a training workshop, you just use that view facilitator link, and the view facilitator file controls that page. We have training users, which just is a file that extracts or gets the list of all of the users of the system. Then we have save training, and knowing save training would just be like a file that processes a create training page. So we have create trainings that create training workshop, and when we look at this file, we look at the form tag. So every time you want to find out the processing page of a particular file, you look at the form tag and look for the attributes. Either you look for the ID attribute, you look for the class attribute, or you look for the action attribute. If there's an action attribute, the value of the action attribute will specify the file that processes that form. If there is no action attribute, then there will be either a class or an ID attribute. If there is an ID attribute, the value of the ID attribute is going to hold the ID that is specified with the hashtag at the jQuery or the AJAX script at the top of that form, and that will be this. So when you look at that, create training is the name here, and you look at the value of the ID attribute here, which is create training, then you now see that this is the script that controls what processes that form. And then you want to look for the URL value here, which is save training, and then you know that this is the file that processes all of this page. And then if you want to maybe add a field to this form, and say you want to add a new field to the form, and once a field is added and information is entered into that form field, you want the processing page to be able to pick up that. And so you go to that processing page to be able to extract that information here, and then you'll be able to maybe go back to the classes file that we looked at yesterday and add a column to the table that stores that information, and then you'll be able to insert by adding that column here and the value you want to put into that column. So the steps and the processes are the same. It's like this: you have a form that needs new fields added. When that new field is added, you need the processing page to know that there's a new field for it to look out for the value that entered into this field. You want the table that stores the information to know that I need a new column to put this new information. And then you want the insert or update queries that goes to that to know that there is a new column that I need to add, and there are values going to that column, which are the values that have been extracted from the forms. So it's the same process across any addition. Then we have something called validate sign up here. This just validates the form where the users are created to make sure that the form field values stick to a particular standard or particular rules, and that is for the developer role of the system. So we have the facilitator role now, and this facilitator role has the same thing. It includes that has the init file, the nav, and the head. The header and the footer files are files that will not disrupt the system as long as you have your init, your head, and your nav included in the files. We have the files that controls this facilitator. All of the files that they are named the same way we've looked at. If you add participants, just means you're adding a participant to a training workshop. You'll look at this URL that says the processing page of save participants, and the form is usually below. One structure is on each page where there is a form. You can see the left hand side will hold the form, and maybe the right hand side will hold retrieve information that have been entered into different forms for you to be able to update. And let's look at what I'm talking about. So let's say, for instance, I'm trying to create a new training. Now, we always see things like have a form on the left where we can create, and then we'll see have update and delete from the right, where we can say we want to easily update or change something here. And if what we want to change is not in a disabled field, we'll just have to delete and recreate. So when you have forms like this, the source code will always hold things like we have a form that creates the training workshop, and then we have the same page having a link to have actions like update and delete, and then you might find the processing of update and delete on the same page of the form as we have them here. Then we'll have things like add questions. You know that you're adding questions to question pool, or allow assessment is like I'm releasing assessment for students to be able to, or participants to be able to see the assessment on their page. So this will allow facilitators to be able to have assessment set way ahead of even the training workshop, and then release the assessment, and then it will be visible there. And then we'll have like allow certification, that will allow certification to be displayed on the page of the participants, and the names are just similar: grade, assessment, create news. Whatever the functionality that file controls is how the files are named. So the name can actually suggest to you what it does, and then you can look to verify and be sure that that is what it actually does. We have the participants also, that is controlled the same way like others, where we have an include folder that has all of the critical files that must be included in the header, and then we also have the files that controls different functionalities. We have certification file is the one that controls the certification exams or certification assessment, and then certification form is one that they'll have to put in the access code beside each assessment that they need to take. And the same thing for the different types of assessments. When you see feedback, just means that that's where they view the feedback for the assessments that was concluded. All right, does anyone have questions? Okay, so we will go over to look at the code that controls the table creation. Now we have several tables, and in the coming weeks there will still be more tables, but your final database documentation will hold all of the tables and their definitions. Now on the forms, there are places where you select country of birth, country of residence. We don't hard code these things. We always have a table in the database that the drop-down menu pulls from, and that table is called the countries table, where we have, it can be named anything, but the way it is named here. And in tomorrow's workshop, where we look at database tables, we're going to look deeply at the tables. We will not be able to cover all the tables just in tomorrow, and so that's why today's one is designed to walk through the code for the tables, so that the database training tomorrow will not exceed the allocated time. Now take note that we have a 3-hour block, and most times it will be less than 3 hours, but we'll try not to exceed 3 hours for each session. Now we have that, and it names, it has the columns for that information, and we can decide to use country code or country names. But when selecting on the drop-down menu, let me show you. For instance, we have let me go to screenings and management, and let's look at the case information form. We'll look at forms, and we'll look at personal information form. So now when looking at things like this, and we get to a place that says country of birth, so let's look for country of birth or country of residence. So we have country of residence as a form field here. Now what it does is, for the drop down menu, we now have a select query that selects everything from country, but we decide we wanted to use the country name column that is specified here, the country name. We can decide what we want is country codes, but it will be difficult for anybody to know the codes of all the countries in the world, so names will be easier, and so that is why name. If you want to change it in the future for the drop down menu to display code, this is where you come to, knowing that the column name here is country code and country name, and you can decide you want to use any of them for the drop down menu. So we chose country name here, and that's what we're using. Okay, then we have things like the next table here is the role table. Now this also have predefined values to define the roles. Now the role table named role is the one that controls the patient management and reporting system roles, and we inserted the values for the roles that we want. We've not put any functionality to allow creation of new roles as the system advances. So there are just 3 predefined roles. What can be added within these roles are different functionalities. All right. Then we have the roles for the virtual training workshop, name training role also, and then defines the roles inserted into the database table. So we use the database tables to control most of the drop-down menus, so that the drop-down menus do not have things like putting the option tags to have fixed, defined list of things. Now I'll give you an example of a defined list of things that can be problematic. We have something like, let's look at this file. We have something like the selection of, okay, let's say facility type, for instance. We can see that the options are predefined list. So in the future, when there are new facility types, it will not be difficult to just add that dynamically. Somebody will have to look for the file that controls that, the form that controls that, and add a new option tag here, which is what we want to discourage. We want to allow non-programmatic updates by just going to configuration and just add a new type. So because this is something that will not change frequently, we've covered all an exhaustive list of all the types of facility that can exist in medicine, except if something new happens, and it's very unlikely. So these are hard-coded with just option values. But things like testing sites, ethnicities, things like that, those lists can change over time. You can have, especially for countries that are high tourist areas, you can have an influx of a lot of people from a particular region, and they might be subjected to immigration tests like tuberculosis screening or x-rays. And at this point, when you start beginning to have a lot of positives, it will now seem like the cases for a particular disease is rising within the country. And when the surveillance wants to start checking where these things are coming from, then the ethnicity will now tell them clearly that these are imported cases and not cases within the countries. Which ethnicity? So maybe you have a new ethnicity. Let's say there's a new building of a bridge happening, and then there was a contract with the Chinese, and there was a lot of influx of the Chinese for it, and there was immigration tests being done for screenings for tuberculosis or any screenings that they do standard for immigration. And then there's a lot of new tuberculosis cases, and then look at the ethnicity, and there is no ethnicity listed for Chinese, because Chinese is not part of the ethnicities in the Caribbean, right? At this point now there will be confusion. So the ethnicity list now Chinese can now be included in ethnicity drop-down menu, so that it can cover for all of those immigration cases or all of those cases for temporary workers that come into the country. And so that is why those kind of values are made dynamic, so you can add and subtract as you wish. Okay, so is it clear or understandable? Okay, so we have the permissions table also that controls all of the permissions, or that where the permissions are linked to their roles, and these permissions are predefined. When the table is created, permissions are already inserted, so you can actually add new permissions as you go along, and define what these permissions will be for in the future. Then we have the users table, the table that stores user information. This table is one of the table where the information entered are all encrypted. And so when you find identifiable information like email addresses, names on the system, you can see that these are encrypted information. And except if you have knowledge of the input size and the input key block size, or the even type of encryption used, there is no way you can re-identify this, but the system has those keys in the environment files and will be able to decrypt this when it is needed. Okay. Then there's a user permission table that associates users to the permissions that they have been assigned. Now, for users, the identification or the unique identification for users of the system is their email addresses. So emails must be unique. You cannot use one email for more than one role. If a particular user has to be assigned more than a role, that user has to have 2 different email addresses. Now, the identification for a client is their unique ID. Unique ID can be anything you want, depending on what the country uses. Some countries use any ID number of any government-issued ID card. Some use the hospital registration number or driver's license. Whatever it is that you use as identification is the unique ID of the client. That unique ID is the only ID that can be used to retrieve information of that client. In the event that it is missing, then that supervisor, someone who is assigned the administration role, can now search for the missing ID and update with a new ID that the client must have presented. So when we talk about user and client, user means the people who use the system to enter records. The client means all of the patients whose information have been entered into the system. So the client uses unique ID, the users use email addresses. Okay, so most of these things are all of these things that can link back to a person are encrypted, so that even if there is a breach of system, the data is being stolen or anything, the information is going to be useless to whoever hacks the system. Then if you have unauthorized people, or not unauthorized people who do not have the legal rights or the permissions to view patient records, like let's say the IT staff or database administrator, you won't need to worry, because they're actually looking at records that already been identified, and so there is no issue with exporting your data and giving to anyone who needs for data analysis, because the only thing they get is actually the data that they need, but not the identity or the name or any sensitive information. So no sensitive information is stored in plain text in the database. And also no sensitive information is transported in plain text. So between the network, when you fill the form, the processing page extracts the value from the form. The processing page encrypts that value and then sends it to the database. So if it goes over the network, it still goes in encrypted form. Then we have tables that hold other information that we're going to discuss in detail, what each table does, what their calling names are. Now the tables are very tricky, because some tables, especially when we get tables like the symptomatic checklist for tuberculosis, do not have column names that are defined according to the data that they hold. And this is because some of these column names are a whole long question or like a questionnaire, and you can't even make the column names that long. And so it's just coded like A, B, C, or something like the risk factor, for instance. Let me show you. So like this risk factor. So what you see as column names is risk factor A, risk factor B. So these are the things we need to go through in detail to define what is risk factor A, what is risk factor B, and what is risk factor C. So it's not going to be a whole long question like, okay, we'll have a risk factor that say, has clients ever been exposed or occupational exposure to HIV, other disease? Is a whole long question. So we'll have to just code these questions. Whatever the code is what we use as the calling names. So this is where the documentation for the database becomes important, that you understand where the meaning of information is written when you need that information. Okay. Then we have the views. Now let's look at the views. Now the views just prevents us from writing extremely complicated queries within our code. I have a table that stores personal information of clients, right? That table holds all demographic information. At the same time, when that information is being sent to that table, we're also sending it to a table that just holds specific information. Like we have a table that holds just the gender of all the clients, so it just has the unique ID and the gender. We have a table that holds just the unique ID and the gender identity, just the unique ID and the sexual orientation, the unique ID and the date of birth. So we have these different tables that store different types of information. So when we get to places like the surveillance dashboard, where we want to get all of the clients that was screened in 2024 that are males and are less than 15 years in age. Now we need this information from across different tables, and we need to perform these queries using complex joins or subqueries. Now at this point, you don't want to write, it is going to be wrong. Most of the time you get it wrong, and then you get misleading information. So we want to now create views from the tables that will merge the information in one place as a new table to now give us the information we need. And so all we do is to run select queries on these views to be able to display the information. For instance, I want to get the age at screening of a client. I have to create a view to make it easier. And that view is going to be selecting information from the different tables. It's going to select information from the testing table, and then it's going to select information from another table. Or we want to create use aggregate function. Like I want to know the age of the client from the date of birth. We want the system to always calculate the current age. Every new year the age changes. We don't want to hard code the age. So I want to look at the date of that report minus the current year that we are in. And then when you do that, you calculate it as age. We get a new view with new columns that tells us the current age of the client or the age of the client at that screening time. So you can look at the date of the screening and the date of birth and subtract them and get a column. So when we do these aggregate functions or these things, we don't want to do them within our code or source code. We want to do them somewhere, maybe in the database, and we want the database to hold a new table called a view, and we want this view to have this aggregated or disaggregated information ready to just receive a select query, and we want these views to be updated in real time as data goes into the tables that are listed to create the views. So we can have more complex views, like trying to get things like I think we have more complex things like trying to get things like the number of people screened in a particular month that have a particular gender and that belong to a particular age group. That will just go across more than 3 tables at the time, and so you want to create a view that merges all of this information. Now we have helper functions also on this classes file, and these functions, they'll have some functions that all they do is to run a query and return a result. Some of them are to insert a record into a database table, some are to update, some of these are to register a client, where we pass in the arguments that have been submitted on the form and processed by the processing page, and insert this record into the database table. We have the ones that we use for login functions that we use. We have functions for to look at or to automatically log out the client or a user, when the user has stayed idle for a particular or a set amount of time. It used to be 5 minutes, but we agreed in one of the first meetings in this consultancy to make it 25 minutes so that people don't get logged out when they're asking patients questions. Okay, so we have a helper functions that help us to do different things. We have this test input function that sanitizes everything that comes from the interface before they are sent to the database to prevent any kind of attack or SQL injection or that or thereabouts. Okay, so anybody has any question? Does everybody understand, or is it easy to follow? All right, then, in the absence of question, this covers the agenda for today. The recording also, as always, will be available. Yes, there is someone asked a question in the chat. There is a by age calculation also on the surveillance place where you can get everything by the ages of the client. I don't know if that answered your question. The Harriet who asked in the chat. Oh, for the baby age calculation, yes, the antenatal system has the calculation for not the baby when the baby is born, but the calculation of the age of gestation age. So when a client registers for antenatal and gives the last menstrual period, then the system automatically calculates the expected date of delivery. If maybe the last menstrual period was not known or was just estimated, and then an expected date of delivery was later found out, that can be updated. The gestation age now automatically calculated and always displayed on the client's page anytime we log on. So if we log on this week, you have the gestation age, the next week the gestation age. The day the baby is born, then that calculation terminates, and then the baby's age is calculated based on the information filled on the labor chart.
Okay, so it would be displayed in like months?
Yeah, the age of the baby.
Or days or something?
No, weeks. Baby's age is displayed in weeks.
Weeks. Okay, yes. Okay. Thanks.
All right. So anyone has more questions? All right, thank you everyone. And if you want to join in the afternoon again, it's not necessary, but if you want to, feel free. But if not, see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.